Jake Morrison was standing in the ruins of someone's kitchen when he heard it. A woman's voice singing a lullaby he hadn't heard in 2 years. Not since the night his wife died. The tornado had ripped through town 3 days ago, and he'd been volunteering with search and rescue, moving through collapsed houses in the fading light. His team had moved on. He was alone, doing one last check, when that melody drifted up from beneath the rubble. It made his hands go cold. The song was something Claire used to hum when their daughter couldn't sleep, and hearing it now felt like a hand reaching out from the grave. He stood there, flashlight shaking, wondering if 48 hours without rest had finally broken him. Then he heard it again, coming from what looked like a basement entrance, half buried under broken beams. When he pulled back the concrete, he found them, a woman and a small girl, curled together in the dark, eyes wide with hunger. The little girl looked up at him, and for one impossible second, Jake saw his daughter's face. Same age, same dark hair matted with dust, same way of holding perfectly still. The woman's lips were cracked and bleeding, but she was still singing, still trying to keep her child calm after 3 days buried alive. "Mama said someone would hear us," the girl whispered. She said the song would bring help. Jake didn't believe in signs. He'd stopped believing the night he lost his family, but he couldn't explain why he'd heard Claire's song in a stranger's voice, or why this child looked exactly like the daughter he'd buried 2 years ago. The woman's name was Rachel, and she couldn't stop apologizing. She said it over and over in the ambulance, her voice hoarse and cracking, while the paramedics worked on her daughter. The little girl, Maya, she'd said her name was Maya, had a fever of 104 degrees and kept drifting in and out of consciousness. Jake sat in the back with them because Rachel wouldn't let go of his hand. Her grip was weak but desperate, like she was afraid if she released him, he'd disappear, and they'd be back in the dark again. "You saved us," Rachel whispered. Her eyes were sunken, dark circles making her look older than she probably was. "I stopped believing anyone would come. Maya kept asking me to sing, so I did. Just something I remembered from the radio years ago." Jake's heart sank. The radio. Of course, it wasn't Claire's special song at all. It was just a melody he'd heard his wife hum. Probably something she'd picked up from the same radio station, the same popular tune that thousands of people knew. His exhausted brain had turned a common lullaby into a message from beyond, had convinced him that Claire was somehow reaching out, when really it was just coincidence and sleep deprivation playing tricks. He looked at Maya again, really looked at her this time. She didn't actually look like Sophie. Different nose, rounder face. The resemblance he'd been so certain of in that first moment was already fading, revealing itself as nothing more than grief and exhaustion warping his perception. She was just a scared 6-year-old girl who happened to have dark hair and be the same age his daughter had been when she died. "What song was it?" he asked anyway, needing to confirm. Rachel hummed a few bars weakly. It was similar to what Claire used to sing, but not the same. Different melody in places, different rhythm. Close enough that his desperate mind had filled in the gaps and heard what it wanted to hear. "My mother used to play the oldies station constantly," Rachel continued. "That one was on all the time when I was a kid. Funny how it just came back to me down there." Jake nodded, said nothing. Let Rachel believe he'd just been asking out of curiosity, not because he'd convinced himself her song was proof of something impossible. The paramedic interrupted then, asking about Maya's medical history, and Jake was grateful for the distraction from his own foolishness. By the time they reached the hospital, Jake had almost talked himself into leaving. These were strangers. He'd done his job, found them, got them to safety. That should be enough. But then Rachel passed out against his shoulder, and Maya's small hand reached out and grabbed his shirt, and he heard himself telling the nurse he'd wait, just to make sure they were okay. He stayed through the night, sitting in the waiting room, staring at his hands. They were covered in concrete dust and dried blood, and he kept thinking about the last time he'd been in a hospital like this. 2 years ago, after the accident, when the doctors had told him there was nothing they could do, that Claire and Sophie had died on impact. He'd sat in a room just like this one, staring at his hands just like this, unable to process that his entire world had ended while he'd been at home watching television because he'd been too tired to go to Sophie's dance recital. That was the part that ate at him in the dark hours. Not just that they'd died, but that he'd chosen not to be there. He'd said he had a headache, that he'd go to the next one, that Sophie would understand. And she had understood, because she was 6 years old and loved him unconditionally. Claire had kissed his forehead and told him to rest, and 3 hours later, both of them were gone, killed by a drunk driver on a road Jake should have been driving on if he'd just gotten off the couch. His brother David arrived around 3 in the morning, looking annoyed. "The hospital called me. You listed me as your emergency contact. Want to tell me why you're still here?" "They didn't have anyone else," Jake said. "So? You found them. You did your part. Why are you paying their hospital bills?" Jake didn't have a good answer. The truth that for one brief, desperate moment he'd thought his dead wife had led him to them sounded insane even in his own head. "The little girl," he said instead. "She reminded me of Sophie." David's expression softened, then hardened again. "Jake, she's not Sophie. You know that, right?" "I know," Jake said quietly. And he did know. Now that the adrenaline had worn off, now that he'd had hours to sit and think, he could see clearly that Maya looked nothing like his daughter. His grief-soaked brain had simply needed her to, if only for a moment. "I just want to make sure they're okay, then I'll go." But he didn't go. He came back the next day. And the day after that. Not because of signs or songs or resemblances that didn't exist, but because Rachel and Maya had nowhere else to turn. And Jake had forgotten what it felt like to be needed for something other than his carpentry skills or his volunteer work. He'd spent 2 years working himself into exhaustion, taking every disaster response shift he could find, as if saving enough strangers might somehow balance the cosmic scale for the family he couldn't save. Rachel and Maya were discharged 4 days later, with nowhere to go. The tornado had destroyed their apartment, Rachel's job at the diner, everything they owned. Rachel admitted, quietly and with shame, that she'd been running from an abusive ex-husband for 3 years, that she couldn't go to a shelter because he'd find them, that she had no family and no friends who could help. Jake heard himself offer his guest room before he'd fully thought it through. Rachel protested, said he'd already done too much. But Jake could see the desperation in her eyes. She was drowning, and he was the only lifeline available. "Just until you get back on your feet," he said. "My house has 3 bedrooms. It's just me and my son." "Why?" Rachel asked. "Why would you do this for complete strangers?" Jake thought about lying, about giving some noble answer about helping people in need, but he was tired of lying, especially to himself. "Because when I found you, I thought I heard my wife's voice. I thought your daughter looked like mine. And I know now that I was wrong, that I was just exhausted and grieving and desperate to believe in something. But you still need help, and I still have space. So maybe it doesn't matter why I'm offering. Maybe it just matters that I am." Rachel studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "Okay, thank you. We won't be any trouble." Tommy took the news better than expected. Jake's 7-year-old son had always been gentle, the kind of kid who cried when he accidentally stepped on ants. When Jake explained that Maya and her mom needed somewhere safe to stay, Tommy just asked if Maya liked to build with blocks, because he had a lot of blocks they could share. But that night, after Tommy was asleep, Jake stood in the doorway of what had been Sophie's room, now cleared out and prepared for Rachel and Maya. He'd boxed everything up and moved it to the attic that afternoon, and the room looked bare, stripped of the personality that had once filled it. Sophie's drawings were gone from the walls. Her bed with the butterfly comforter was gone. The bookshelf full of picture books was gone. It was just empty space now, waiting for someone new. Jake found himself sitting on the floor in the empty room, back against the wall, and for the first time in months, he let himself really cry. Not the silent tears that sometimes came late at night, but full, body-shaking sobs that felt like they might tear him apart. He cried for Sophie, who would never get to be 7 or 8, or grown. He cried for Claire, who would never see her son graduate, or get married, or have kids of his own. And he cried for himself, for the man he'd been before the accident, who'd taken for granted that the people he loved would always be there. The worst part wasn't the big moments, it was the small ones. The way he still sometimes set the table for 4 before remembering. The way he'd reach for his phone to text Claire something funny Tommy had said, then remember she wouldn't answer. The way he couldn't bring himself to wash Sophie's favorite blanket because it still smelled like her strawberry shampoo, and he was terrified that once that smell was gone, he'd start forgetting other things. Her laugh. The way she mispronounced certain words. The weight of her in his arms when he carried her to bed. Was he allowed to be happy again? Was laughing at Tommy's jokes a betrayal of Sophie's memory? Was feeling attracted to Rachel an insult to Claire? These questions circled his mind constantly, and he had no good answers. The first week with Rachel and Maya was awkward. Rachel kept trying to help around the house, cooking and cleaning, despite Jake's protests that she should rest. Maya was quiet, spending most of her time drawing at the kitchen table or sitting with Tommy while he played. She didn't look anything like Sophie in the daylight of Jake's house. Her eyes were lighter, her smile different, her whole energy distinct. Jake felt embarrassed by how convinced he'd been in that first moment. Grief did strange things to perception, turned strangers into ghosts, and coincidences into miracles. One morning, Jake was making coffee when he smelled something that stopped him cold. Cinnamon and vanilla. The exact combination Claire used to make when she baked muffins on Saturday mornings. He turned around and saw Rachel pulling a tray of muffins from the oven, smiling apologetically. "I hope you don't mind," she said. "I wanted to do something to thank you, and Maya mentioned Tommy likes muffins." Jake couldn't speak. The smell was so perfectly, exactly right that for a disorienting second, he forgot Claire was dead. His brain supplied the familiar scene. Claire in her weekend clothes, flour on her nose, humming while she baked. Then reality crashed back, and he had to grip the counter to steady himself. "Jake?" Rachel's smile faded into concern. "Are you okay?" "Yeah," he managed. "Sorry, just, my wife used to make those. Same recipe, I think." Rachel's face fell. "I'm so sorry. I didn't know. I can throw them out." "No," Jake said quickly. "No, it's okay. It's just—" He didn't know how to explain that grief wasn't a straight line, that you could go days feeling almost normal and then get ambushed by a smell or a song or the angle of light through a window. "It's okay," he said again, more firmly. "They smell great." Rachel studied him with understanding that went deeper than words. She'd lost people too, Jake realized. Maybe not to death. But she knew what it was like to have memories that hurt. She nodded slowly and poured him coffee without saying anything else. The music box incident happened on day 8. Jake had kept Sophie's old music box on the hallway shelf, a simple wooden thing that played a generic lullaby when opened. He'd avoided it for 2 years, couldn't stand the sound, but also couldn't throw it away. He came home from work to find it open on the kitchen counter, the mechanism playing its tinny melody. Maya stood nearby looking guilty while Rachel tried to apologize. "I'm so sorry," Rachel said. "Maya was exploring and found it. I should have been watching her closer." "It's okay," Jake said, though his hands were shaking. He looked at Maya, who was crying silently, tears streaming down her face. He knelt down next to her. "Hey, it's okay." "Did you like the song?" Maya nodded hesitantly. "It's pretty, But it's not the same as the one Mama sang in the dark place. I thought maybe it was. But it's different. I'm sorry I touched it. I didn't mean to make you sad." Something in Jake's chest loosened. "You didn't make me sad, sweetheart. I was already sad. The box just reminded me." "Of your little girl?" Maya whispered. Jake nodded, unable to speak. "Do you miss her?" "Every day." Maya was quiet for a moment, then asked with the brutal honesty of children, "If you could have her back, would you want us to leave?" The question hit Jake like a physical blow. He looked up at Rachel, saw her stricken expression, then back at Maya. "That's not how it works," he said gently. "I can't have her back. She's gone. But that doesn't mean there's no room in my life for other people. Hearts don't work like that. They get bigger, not smaller." He wasn't sure he believed it even as he said it, but Maya seemed satisfied with the answer. She hugged him quickly, then ran off to find Tommy. Rachel stayed in the kitchen, watching Jake with careful eyes. "Does your heart feel bigger?" she asked quietly. Jake thought about it honestly. "No," he admitted. "It feels broken. But maybe broken things can still hold new people, even if they don't hold them the same way." That night, after everyone was asleep, Jake went up to the attic. He'd been avoiding it since boxing up Sophie's things, but now he needed to see them. Needed to make sure they were still real, that his daughter had existed and wasn't just fading into abstract memory. He found Sophie's favorite stuffed rabbit, the one she'd named Mr. Carrots, even though it was purple. He held it to his face and breathed in, hoping for her scent, but it just smelled like cardboard and dust. The strawberry shampoo smell was gone. He'd lost it without even realizing. Panic clawed at Jake's throat. If he'd lost her smell, what else was fading? Could he still picture her face without looking at photos? Did he remember her voice accurately? Or was he just remembering what he thought she sounded like? In 10 years, would he remember anything real about her at all? Or would she just be a collection of photographs and stories? He found Claire's journals at the bottom of a box. He'd never been able to read them before. Every time he tried, the grief swallowed him whole. But now he forced himself to open the most recent one, flipping through pages dated in the weeks before her death. Most of it was mundane. Notes about Tommy's preschool, grocery lists, thoughts about a book she'd been reading. But then, 1 week before the accident, he found an entry that made his hands shake. "I'm worried about Jake. He's been so distant lately, spending all his time at work or on the couch. I tried to talk to him about it today, but he said he was just tired. I know that's not all of it. Sometimes I catch him looking at me and the kids like he's already somewhere else. I want to tell him that I see it, that I know he's struggling, that it's okay to not be okay all the time. But I don't know how to start that conversation without making him feel worse. If something ever happens to me, I hope someone tells him, living with depression doesn't make you a bad husband or father. It just makes you human. And I loved him exactly as he was, broken parts and all. I hope he knows he deserves to be happy, even if I'm not there to see it." Jake read the entry 3 times, tears blurring the words. Claire had known. She'd known he was depressed, that he was pulling away, and she'd loved him anyway. She'd worried about him, and in her last weeks, she'd somehow known to write down permission for him to keep living if she was gone. But permission didn't make it easier. Knowing Claire would want him to be happy didn't erase the guilt of feeling anything other than grief. It didn't explain why he was still here when she and Sophie weren't. It didn't answer the question that haunted him every single day. Why did he get to survive when they didn't? He stayed in the attic until dawn, reading through Claire's journals, crying until he had no tears left. By the time he came downstairs, Tommy was already awake, eating cereal at the kitchen table with Maya, while Rachel made eggs. Tommy took one look at Jake's face and knew. "You were looking at Mom's stuff. It wasn't a question." Tommy was 7, but sometimes seemed much older. like grief had forced him to grow up too fast. "Yeah," Jake admitted. "Do you still remember what she looked like? Without pictures?" The question cut deep because it was exactly what Jake had been terrified of all night. "I think so," he said carefully. "Why?" Tommy stirred his cereal, not meeting Jake's eyes. "Sometimes I try really hard to remember Mom and Sophie, but their faces get blurry in my head. And then I feel bad, like I'm forgetting them." Jake sat down next to his son, pulled him close. "Me too, buddy. Me too." "Really?" "Yeah. And it scares me. Because if I forget what they looked like or sounded like, it feels like they disappear all over again." Tommy was quiet for a moment. "Miss Rachel says that's not how memory works. She says the people we love live in the things they taught us and the ways they changed us, not just in our heads." Jake looked over at Rachel, who was very carefully not looking at them, focused intently on the eggs. "Miss Rachel's pretty smart," he said. "Yeah," Tommy agreed. Then, after a pause, "Dad, if I laugh a lot now, will Mom be sad?" And there it was, the question Jake had been asking himself for 2 years, now coming from his 7-year-old son. The guilt of surviving, the fear of moving forward, the terrible weight of wondering if being happy meant betraying the dead. Jake took a shaky breath. "No, buddy. Mom would be sad if you didn't laugh." She loved hearing you laugh. It was one of her favorite sounds in the whole world. But what if I laugh so much I forget to be sad? What if I forget them because I'm happy? Jake felt something crack open in his chest. Being happy doesn't mean forgetting them. It means carrying them with you while you keep living. And I think, his voice broke, I think that's what they'd want, for us to keep living, not just surviving. Tommy nodded slowly, processing this. Then he looked at Maya, who'd been listening quietly. "So, it's okay that Maya makes me laugh, even though Sophie used to?" "Yeah," Jake said. "It's more than okay." Maya suddenly burst into tears. "I don't want to replace anybody," she sobbed. "I just want to be me." Rachel moved quickly, pulling Maya into her arms, but Jake was already there too. He knelt down and looked into Maya's frightened eyes. "You're not replacing anyone," he said firmly. "Sophie was Sophie. You're you. You're both people I care about, but in different ways. My heart didn't get smaller when Sophie died. It just got room for different kinds of love." He wasn't sure that was true, wasn't sure his heart would ever not feel broken and wrong, but these kids needed to hear it. They needed permission to exist without guilt, without feeling like they were erasures of the people who came before. Rachel caught his eye over Maya's head, and in her expression he saw understanding and gratitude and something else, a recognition that they were both fighting the same battle, just on different fronts. She was trying to build a new life while running from an old one. He was trying to live while carrying his dead. Neither of them had any idea if they were doing it right. Tommy got sick 3 weeks after Rachel and Maya moved in. What started as a cold turned into pneumonia, and suddenly Jake was back in a hospital, sitting vigil over someone he loved, terrified of losing another person to randomness and bad luck. The fear was overwhelming. Every beep of the monitor made Jake's heart race. Every time Tommy's breathing seemed labored, Jake wanted to scream at the doctors to do something, fix it, make it better. He couldn't lose Tommy. He couldn't survive losing Tommy. If his son died, Jake would have no reason left to keep living. Rachel showed up at midnight with Maya, despite visiting hours being over. The night nurse took one look at Rachel's determined face and let them through without argument. Maya walked straight to Tommy's bedside and took his hand. She didn't say anything for a long time, just stood there, holding on like she could anchor him to the world through sheer willpower. Then she started humming, not the song from the basement, but something softer, something she was making up as she went. Tommy's eyes fluttered open. His voice was rough when he spoke. "Maya? You have to get better," Maya said seriously. "Because you're my best friend, and best friends don't leave." Something about the simple certainty in her voice made Jake's throat close up. Tommy gave a weak smile and squeezed her hand. "Okay," Tommy whispered. "I'll try." Rachel sat down next to Jake, and for a while they just existed in silence, two parents watching their children hold on to each other. Finally, Rachel spoke. "When Maya's father used to hurt me," she said quietly, "I used to think I didn't deserve better, that this was just what love looked like when you were someone like me. And even after I left, even after I ran, I kept thinking that I was broken, in some way that meant I'd never get to have normal things. A home, safety, people who cared without conditions." Jake didn't know what to say, so he just listened. "You did a crazy thing taking us in," Rachel continued. "And maybe you did it for the wrong reasons at first. But you gave us something I thought we'd lost forever. The feeling that someone was on our side, that we weren't alone." "You're not alone," Jake said. "Neither are you," Rachel replied. She reached over and took his hand, and they sat like that until morning, watching their kids sleep, both of them too afraid to let go. Tommy recovered over the next 3 days. The antibiotics worked, the fever broke, and by the end of the week he was demanding to go home. On the last night before discharge, after Rachel had taken Maya to get dinner, Tommy looked at Jake with serious eyes. "Dad? Am I allowed to love Miss Rachel and Maya, even though I still love Mom and Sophie?" Jake felt like he'd been punched. "Of course you are. But how? How do you love new people without it taking away from the old people?" Jake didn't have a good answer. "I don't know, bud. I'm still figuring that out myself." "But you are figuring it out, right? You're not going to make them leave." "No," Jake said, and realized he meant it. "I'm not going to make them leave." "Good," Tommy said. Then quieter. "I like having Maya here. It makes the house feel less empty." "Is that okay?" Jake pulled his son close, kissed the top of his head. "Yeah, Tommy, that's more than okay." David showed up the next morning as they were getting ready to leave. He pulled Jake aside, while Rachel helped Tommy into his clothes. "You're really doing this?" David asked. "Making them family?" "I think so," Jake admitted. "Not because I'm replacing Claire and Sophie. I could never replace them. But because having Rachel and Maya here reminds me that I'm still alive. And maybe that's enough of a reason." David studied him for a long moment. "You look different than you did 3 weeks ago." "Different how?" "Less like a ghost." Jake didn't know how to respond to that. He'd felt like a ghost for so long, present but not really there, going through the motions of living without actually feeling alive. Was that changing? He wasn't sure, but maybe wanting it to change was a start. "Mom and Dad are going to want to meet them," David said. "Rachel and Maya." "Fair warning." "I know. And if Rachel's ex shows up—" "He won't," Jake said, hoping he was right. David gripped his shoulder. "I'm proud of you, little brother. This is terrifying and messy and probably too fast. But you're actually living again instead of just waiting to die. That matters." The weeks that followed fell into a rhythm that almost felt normal. Rachel found a new job at a diner across town, this time using her real name and real paperwork. Jake helped her open a bank account, get Maya enrolled at Tommy's school, build a life that wasn't based on running and hiding. The kids became inseparable. Tommy teaching Maya to ride a bike, Maya teaching Tommy to draw, both of them creating their own language of inside jokes and shared references. But normal didn't mean easy. Jake still had days where the grief hit him so hard he could barely breathe. Days where he'd see a father and daughter at the grocery store and have to leave his cart and walk out. Days where he'd wake up and forget, just for a second, that Claire and Sophie were gone, and the remembering felt like dying all over again. One particularly bad night, about 3 months in, Jake found himself sitting on the floor of Sophie's old room, Maya's room now, at 2 in the morning. He'd gotten up to check on Tommy, and had somehow ended up here instead, staring at walls that used to be covered in his daughter's artwork. Rachel found him there. She didn't say anything, just sat down next to him on the floor and waited. "I can't remember her voice," Jake finally said. His own voice sounded hollow. Sophie's voice. "I used to hear it in my head all the time, but now, when I try to remember it, there's nothing. Just silence." Rachel was quiet for a moment. What did she used to say? What's a sentence you can picture her saying? Jake thought. "She used to wake me up on Saturday mornings by jumping on the bed and yelling, 'Pancake time, Daddy.' She'd draw out the word, time, like it had 5 syllables. 'Close your eyes,' Rachel said gently. 'Picture the scene. Not her face, the whole scene. The jumping, the light coming through the window, the feeling of the bed bouncing. Don't try to force the voice, just watch the memory.' Jake closed his eyes and did what she said. At first, there was nothing. But then, slowly, he could see it. Sophie's dark hair flying as she jumped, her pajamas with the dinosaurs on them, the way morning light made everything golden. And then, faint, but there. 'Pancake time, Daddy.' Jake opened his eyes, tears streaming down his face. 'I heard it, just for a second, but I heard it.' 'The memories aren't gone,' Rachel said softly. 'They're just buried. You have to dig for them sometimes, but they're there.' 'How do you know that?' 'Because I have memories I thought I'd lost too, of my mother, of myself before I became someone running. Sometimes I think they're gone forever, and then something small will bring them back. A smell, or a sound, or the way light hits a wall. Memory isn't like a photograph that fades. It's more like water. It changes shape, flows different ways. But it doesn't disappear." Jake looked at her, really looked at her. She was beautiful, he realized. Not because she looked like Claire, because she didn't. Just beautiful in her own right, with her own strength and scars and ways of surviving. "I'm scared," he admitted, "of what it means that I'm starting to feel things again. Happy things. Things that aren't grief." "Does it feel like betrayal?" Rachel asked. "Sometimes. Claire loved you, right?" "Yeah." "Then she wouldn't want you to spend the rest of your life as a memorial to her. She'd want you to live." "How do you know?" "Because that's what love is. Wanting the person you love to be okay, even if you can't be there to see it." She paused. "My mother died when I was 12. And before she died, she told me that grief was just love with nowhere to go. That it never really stops. You just learn to carry it differently, to let it be part of you without letting it be all of you." Jake let that sink in. Grief was love with nowhere to go. Maybe that was it. Maybe he'd been trying so hard to hold on to the grief because letting it soften felt like letting go of Claire and Sophie themselves. But maybe carrying them didn't have to hurt so much. Maybe he could love them and also love the people right in front of him. "I don't know how to do this," he said. "How to move forward without leaving them behind." "You're not leaving them behind," Rachel said. "You're taking them with you. There's a difference." She stood up then, offered him her hand. He took it and let her pull him to his feet. They stood there in the hallway, hands still clasped, and Jake felt something shift in his chest. Not healing. He wasn't sure he'd ever fully heal. But maybe the beginning of learning to live with the wound. 4 months after the tornado, Jake took Rachel and the kids to meet his parents. His mother cried the entire time, kept hugging Rachel and Maya like they were miracles. His father pulled Jake aside and said simply, "Your wife would be happy you're not drowning anymore." 6 months in, Jake and Rachel had their first real fight. It was about something stupid, dishes left in the sink. But it escalated into Rachel screaming that she couldn't live her life tiptoeing around his grief. and Jake yelling that he didn't ask her to tiptoe. He just needed space to figure out who he was supposed to be now. They both said things they didn't mean, and Rachel locked herself in her room while Jake drove around for 2 hours trying to calm down. When he came back, he found her sitting on the porch steps. "I'm sorry," she said immediately. "I shouldn't have said you were using your grief as an excuse to keep people at arm's length." "You weren't wrong," Jake admitted, sitting down next to her. "I am scared of getting close to you and then losing you too. It's easier to keep some distance." "I'm scared too," Rachel said, "of getting comfortable here and then having to run again, of letting Maya get attached and then ripping her away, of trusting that this, us, is real and not just temporary. So what do we do?" Rachel was quiet for a long time. "We try anyway. We're scared together, and we try anyway." Jake reached over and took her hand. "Okay." 8 months after the tornado, Jake started seeing a therapist. Rachel had gently but firmly suggested it after Jake had a panic attack in the grocery store, triggered by seeing a little girl who reminded him of Sophie. The therapist, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes, helped Jake understand that grief wasn't something to get over, but something to integrate. That loving again didn't diminish what he'd had before. That survivor's guilt was normal, but didn't need to define the rest of his life. In one session, about 2 months in, the therapist asked Jake to write a letter to Claire. Not to send anywhere, just to say the things he'd never gotten to say. Jake brought the letter to his next session. His hands shook as he read it aloud. "I'm sorry I wasn't there the night you died. I'm sorry I chose the couch over the recital. I'm sorry for all the times I was too depressed to be fully present. I'm sorry I didn't tell you enough how much I loved you. But I'm not sorry for living. I'm not sorry for letting Rachel and Maya into our house. I'm not sorry for laughing again, even though sometimes the laughter feels like betrayal, because I finally understand what you tried to tell me in that last journal entry. Loving you doesn't mean dying with you. It means carrying what you taught me into whatever comes next. You left me with grief, but you also left me with the capacity to love, to be a father, to build a home, to find meaning in small moments. And those gifts don't disappear just because you did. I'm learning to live with the pain, not through it or past it, but with it, alongside it. The pain is proof that what we had mattered, but so is the joy I'm finding now. Both can be true at the same time. Thank you for giving me permission to be happy. I'm trying, Claire. Every day, I'm trying. And I hope, you'd be proud of how hard I'm trying. I love you. I'll always love you. But I'm learning to love other people too, and I'm learning that doing so doesn't make my love for you any smaller. Rest easy, my love. I've got it from here. When Jake finished reading, he was crying. The therapist handed him a tissue and asked, "What do you want to do with this letter?" Jake thought about it. "I want to bring it to her grave, not to leave it there, but to read it to her, to say goodbye to the version of me that was drowning." "That sounds like a good plan," the therapist said. "When will you do it?" "Soon," Jake said, "when I'm ready." 1 year after the tornado, Jake stood at Claire's grave with the letter folded in his pocket. Rachel and the kids were waiting in the car, giving him privacy. He'd told them he needed to do this alone, and they'd understood. The cemetery was quiet, just birds and wind and the distant sound of traffic. Jake knelt down by the headstone, traced Claire's name with his finger. "Hi," he said softly. "It's been a while. I'm sorry I haven't visited much. It's been hard. But I think you'd understand." He pulled out the letter but didn't unfold it. He'd memorized it by now, didn't need to read the words. "I met someone," he said. "Her name is Rachel. She has a daughter named Maya. They're living with us now. And I think I'm falling in love with her, which feels impossible and terrifying and wrong, except it also feels right in a way I can't explain." He paused, listening to the wind. "I'm not replacing you. I could never replace you. But I'm also not going to spend the rest of my life as a memorial to you, because you wouldn't want that. I know you wouldn't want that." Jake felt tears sliding down his face, but they didn't feel like grief tears. They felt like release. "I'm going to ask Rachel to marry me," he said. "Not tomorrow, not next week, but soon, when the time feels right. And I wanted you to know. I wanted to tell you that I'm choosing to live again. That I'm choosing happiness, even though it scares me, even though part of me feels like I don't deserve it." He stood up, brushed grass from his knees. "Thank you," he whispered. "For everything. For Tommy. For the years we had. For teaching me how to love. I'm going to take that love and build something new with it. Something that honors what we had without being chained to it." He kissed his fingers, pressed them to her name on the stone. "Goodbye, Claire. Rest easy. I've got it from here." He walked back to the car where his family waited. Rachel looked up at him with questions in her eyes, but she didn't ask. She just took his hand and squeezed. "You okay?" she asked. "Yeah," Jake said. And for the first time in 2 years, he meant it. "I'm okay." That night, after the kids were asleep, Jake found Rachel sitting on the back porch. He sat down next to her, and they were quiet for a while, listening to the summer night sounds, crickets and distant cars and wind in the trees. "I want to tell you something," Rachel said, "and I need you to just listen, not try to fix it or make it better." "Okay," Jake said. "I'm falling in love with you," she said. "And it terrifies me, because every time I've loved someone, they've either hurt me or left me or died. And I don't know how to trust that you'll be different. But I'm doing it anyway, which makes me either very brave or very stupid." Jake's heart was pounding. "Can I say something now?" "Yes. I'm falling in love with you too. And it also terrifies me, because I didn't think I was allowed to love anyone again. I thought my one chance at love died with Claire, and everything after would just be less. But you're not less. You're different. And I'm learning that different doesn't mean worse." Rachel turned to look at him, tears shining in her eyes. "I'm not her. I'll never be her." "I don't want you to be her," Jake said. "I want you to be you. Rachel, the woman who survived things that should have broken her. The woman who kept singing to her daughter in the dark. The woman who taught me that grief doesn't have to be the end of the story." She kissed him then, and it felt like permission. From Claire, from himself, from the universe. Permission to love again. To live again. To let joy exist alongside sorrow without guilt. They sat on the porch until late, talking about everything and nothing. About Rachel's childhood and Jake's marriage. About their fears and hopes. About what their future might look like if they were brave enough to build it together. Finally, around midnight, Jake said, "I went to Claire's grave today." "I know," Rachel said. "How was it?" "Good. Hard, but good. I told her about you, about us." He paused. "I told her I was going to ask you to marry me." Rachel went very still. "Are you?" "Yes," Jake said. "Not tonight. I haven't bought a ring or planned anything. But yes, when the time is right, if you'll have me." Rachel was quiet for so long that Jake started to worry. He'd said the wrong thing, moved too fast, ruined everything. But then she spoke, her voice thick with emotion. "Yes," she said. "When the time is right. Yes." They sat there holding hands, both of them crying and laughing at the same time. And Jake thought about the man he'd been a year ago. Standing in Rubble, hearing a song that wasn't there, seeing a child who didn't exist. desperate and broken, and looking for magic to give his pain meaning. He didn't need magic anymore. Didn't need signs or cosmic justifications. He just needed this. Ordinary moments with people he loved. The hard work of showing up for them every day. The courage to keep his heart open even when it hurt. The story didn't have a neat ending, because life doesn't work that way. Jake would have good days and bad days. There would be moments when grief ambushed him, when he'd cry for what he'd lost. But there would also be laughter and joy and ordinary happiness. Both would always be true. Both would always be part of him. And that was enough. That night, before bed, Jake took out his old journal, the one he'd started after Claire died, but had abandoned because it hurt too much. He opened to a fresh page and wrote, "Today I told Claire I was going to marry Rachel. I expected to feel guilty, but instead, I felt grateful. Grateful that Claire taught me how to love. Grateful that I survived long enough to love again. Grateful that loss didn't destroy me, even though there were days I wished it would. Grief doesn't disappear, but it gets quieter. And in the quiet spaces there's room for other things. Love, joy, hope, family. I'm not just surviving anymore. I'm living. And that's the best way I know to honor the people I lost, by refusing to waste the life they can't have." Rachel said yes to a question I haven't officially asked yet. Maya called me Dad yesterday and didn't apologize after. Tommy is sleeping peacefully in the next room, healthy and whole. My house is full again, in a different way than before, but full nonetheless. This is my life now. Messy and complicated and beautiful and real. I'm carrying Claire and Sophie with me, but I'm walking toward the living. And somewhere, wherever she is, if she is anywhere at all, I hope Claire knows. Hopes she can see that I finally understood what she tried to tell me in that last journal entry. I'm living, not just surviving. Living, and it's enough. It's more than enough. It's everything. He closed the journal and turned off the light. Down the hall, he could hear Tommy's soft breathing, Maya's occasional sleep murmurs, Rachel moving quietly in their shared bathroom, the sounds of family, the sounds of life continuing. Jake closed his eyes and, for the first time in 2 years, felt something close to peace. Not the absence of grief, but the coexistence of grief and joy, pain and love, loss and hope. He was carrying his dead with him, but he was walking toward the living. And that, finally, impossibly, miraculously, was enough.